More than a century ago, an angel visited a young woman in South Africa and told her what would happen just before the second coming of Christ. He explained the effect and why it will concern Europe. This is just a warning of possible devastation to come. Prophets warned us about this. The Bible goes into some detail, but there are also other manuscripts from roughly 4,000 years ago that tells us what we may expect. In one of the next videos, I will go into detail as to what those old manuscripts had to say on this matter. The object will explain everything about what Bertha Didda said about the coming war and what several prophets, some of which come from the Bible, said about the 3 days of darkness. It will explain how God is going to enter the fight and also what the shocking storm will be that will hit South Africa. But more about that in a later video. There is still time. The angel gave a young woman an important prophecy concerning South Africa and the Christians who will remain after the war and the cataclysms. The young woman was Johanna Brandt of the Boer nation, who lived in the early 1900s in South Africa. She was first visited by this angel, which she called the messenger, and was given the task of sounding the alarm and letting the world know what is coming. She explained what she saw will happen in South Africa just before the second coming of Christ, and shortly after the war breaks out. It will be terrifying, but that is how God will cleanse the country for a very specific purpose. According to both Seer van Rensburg and Johanna Brandt, Christians will flee from Europe on boats when the war and persecution in Europe gets too horrible to bear. By then, South Africa will have been cleansed and will be safe to receive them. There will also be enough food for whoever goes there. By now, most of us realize that freedom of religion will soon end. There is already an open call for the complete annihilation of the Christians, the start of which we saw in France, where whites were slaughtered in the streets by the Muslims. There will be good reason for Christians to flee from Europe. But before I begin, I have to explain some terminology about South Africa. There are 2 words for a nation in Afrikaans, the official language of South Africa. The one is Nasie, or nation, as most people who know it, and which represent all the people of the country, from all races. The word volk, though, represents, apart from a nation, also a group with a homogenic character. The Boer Volk belongs to the latter, and they founded the 2 republics, Transvaal and the Orange Free State in the 19th century in South Africa. They are homogenic to this day. The Afrikaner, a liberal thinker, came later and eventually pushed the Boer Volk aside to rule the country. The Boer Volk was betrayed by people from within the Afrikaner ranks as well as by the English posing falsely as friends. Today, the Afrikaner had partly become a mix of different peoples, but the Boer Volk is still homogenic, as it had been for 2 centuries. Johanna was part of the Boer Volk, as was her contemporary, Seer van Rensburg. Both of them were blessed with the gift of prophecy. The prophecies of Johanna began when she was alone on the 1st of December 1916, praying beside the bed of her dying mother, Mrs. van Warmelo, who was near her end after a long illness. While absorbed in prayer, suddenly a presence brighter than the sun entered the room and called to Johanna in a clear voice. "You, fearless," the angel called. "What you have done for your country and your people are well done. You are now being called to greater things." She wanted to know who he was. "I am a messenger from heaven, who was sent to anoint you with the spirit of prophecy," he answered. "The past year was only a trial period, and you did not waver. Many things that have been hidden will soon be revealed to you. I have something to tell you." She had to close her eyes, and then he showed her the time of her mother's death as proof of who he was. At that moment it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and she was shown the exact time that her mother would die. When she wanted to wake her sister, he stopped her. She had to wait until 5 o'clock that morning. She realized that she was on the brink of unutterable things, and had to gather every ounce of courage needed to face whatever it was. She sat down again. During the 3 hours she spent alone with the messenger, he gave her a few visions of which she asked the meaning. He showed her all the dangers and difficulties that a life of dedication and service holds. He also pointed out her own sins and weaknesses, knowing her deepest secret thoughts, and told her, withdraw from the world. You cannot serve until you have laid down all earthly ties and temptations and emptied the chalice of sufferings right down to the last dreg. She wrote, His order made 1,000 things rush through my mind. I was frightened and overwhelmed. Just as I thought I was going to die from fear, I heard the messenger say, "Peace be with you in these hours, peace and strength." And suddenly a wonderful feeling of calm came over me. The fear and the messenger had disappeared. 5 o'clock the next morning, 5 minutes before the time when the messenger said her mother would die, the family was gathered around her deathbed. The old woman tried to talk to them but couldn't. It was as though she came back from another world with a heavenly radiance in her eyes and the light of eternal peace on her face. Johanna said she knew then that there were beautiful things on the other side. At the exact time the messenger said she would, Johanna's mother died. A week later, on Thursday night of 7th December 1916, Johanna slowly awoke at 2 a.m. She tells in her own words, "Suddenly the darkness changed to the beauty of an ethereal light, and the restful voice of the messenger sounded in my soul with the same words that he addressed me with that first time. 'You, fearless, what have you done for your country and people is good, but are you willing to take one step further? Are you willing to give your life for the good of South Africa?' And without a moment's hesitation she replied, 'If that is your will, then I am not only ready, but also extremely grateful.' The angel continued, 'Then you will write down what I am going to tell you. You were born for this hour, and your whole life was a preparation for the revelation that is about to be made. You will also receive the necessary strength to fulfill your task, but know this, it will only be done at the cost of your life that you bring as willing sacrifice for the holy task that is more valuable to you than life itself. You have been chosen but not forced. The work and sacrifices in the vineyards of the king must be voluntary. There is no death, no division that you call death. You do not fear the future, and rightly so. You and your people will accept the message through faith alone, without proof, without the higher authority of the written word, but the word will accept it through witnessing the fulfilling of the prophecies of the catastrophes that will come over you. Therefore, through your suffering." She was told that in the end time South Africa will play a very important role. When the war in Europe will be already well underway, there will rage a different war in South Africa, one to cleanse the country, and God will use the Boere Volk to do it. He will soon work to ready South Africa for the coming of the Christians who will flee from the persecution and the war in Europe. Seer van Rensburg also had visions about what will transpire when the Third World War breaks out. He said the soldiers in Europe will be wearing long overcoats when the war starts, and all the trouble in South Africa will begin shortly after the coldest winter in many years. It had been an exceptionally cold winter in 2023. Johanna wrote, "God has mercy on South Africa, but there were also conditions and responsibilities that rested upon the people. O folk of South Africa, the sacrifice you will have to make is great, and great is the responsibility that rests on your shoulders." The sacrifice which she referred to, and being asked from the Boere Volk, is the sacrifice of complete faith under very difficult circumstances. She was told by the messenger, "South Africa is a pearl in the eyes of our Lord, for here the first great miracles of the new century mentioned in Revelation will take place. Through South Africa the world will be compelled to believe that the second coming of the Redeemer is at hand." Then the messenger showed her a terrible scene of the terrors and evils that awaited her beloved country and her people in the future. It was such a devastating vision that she cried out in fear, "Spare, spare South Africa." Johanna relates, "I see a beautiful land being attacked by a seething hurricane. What is strange is the sudden unexpectedness of the storm. It is so terrifying that even the earth seemed to tremble and roar, while the lightning bolts and thundering of angry elements tore the clouds apart, and then hurling a shower of fire and hailstones down on the earth. There is blood everywhere, and devastation threatened to wipe everything off the face of the earth. I see human beings being driven like leaves before the wind and pursued to all parts of the earth." Although South Africa is prone to storms, what she describes has never happened in the history of that country. It will indeed be something out of the ordinary and fearsome. She continued, "It was revealed to me by the messenger that the dangers that are waiting for South Africa will be 1,000 times worse if the black people interfere. It will be in the power of the different heads of the tribes to control their people and to explicitly forbid them to take part in anything that will happen. She then addresses the black people again. They are not to fight among themselves, and they must not go out to murder and plunder the white people. When people are without shelter out in the open veldt across the country, and the elements are raging, and when the mighty rumble and roar shakes the earth, they must keep as calm as possible and stay where they are, and do nothing but defend themselves, because the judgment will be severe on anyone who ignores this command of the Almighty. Dr. Willie Maree had a vision about this in 2003. He said that he saw the sea rising up and drowning the cities and towns along the coast of South Africa. Table Mountain will become an island in the sea when the land will tear open along the Milnerton Fault. Huge parts of Cape Town will disappear under the waves and millions will drown. Johanna saw the storm that will accompany the earthquakes as it rushes inland, where everything will be destroyed by the sheer force of it. But Dr. Maree saw what will happen to the coastal areas. South Africa will be the first to go into this enormous storm from outer space, but will also be the first to come out of it. Much worse, though, will be waiting for the northern parts of the globe. A complete discussion will follow in another video. But the specific warning aimed at the black people was actually printed and distributed among them by Johanna herself over 100 years ago, but they did not heed the warning nor care. Even today, such a warning addressed to the black people will fall on deaf ears. Johanna needed to know from the messenger as well, why then this specific message to all black nations in South Africa? His answer was unambiguous. Because in that time God will judge the whole nation of South Africa and take them through the crucible because of their abominable sins and iniquity. But the black nations must keep to themselves, and if they don't, much worse things will be waiting for them. She continued, the storm that threatened South Africa with destruction seemed to rage across the length and breadth of the country. The darkness of a terrible night descended over all, and many souls fervently prayed for death to release them, but all in vain. The start of the storm was strange and completely unexpected. It was an alarming eruption of unprecedented anger. After South Africa was totally destroyed, the storm abated just as suddenly. It was of short duration, despite the violence of it. She once again pleaded, "Please spare South Africa." The messenger looked at her and replied, "Do you really think that your country had no darkness to overcome? Do you not understand that if South Africa is spared these disasters, it cannot share in the coming glory? No, the scenes you have witnessed are unavoidable. The disasters threatening South Africa will gradually be caused by hatred and envy, violence, injustice and jealousy. The storm is an eruption that no one will be able to withstand, caused by long cultivated suspicion, mischief-making, hypocrisy, corruption, oppression and evil passions. All the evil that has built up over the years and kept suppressed in the heart of your people. What people sow, they must reap. They sowed the wind and are reaping the whirlwind. In South Africa, they bent the knee to the god of gold, with thoughts of revenge on the one hand and injustice, violence and greed on the other. The field has long ago been prepared in hundreds of thousands of hearts in South Africa for this storm that must come soon. Europe too will feel the full brunt of this disastrous cosmic storm. In 1975, Dr. Rolf Martin had this prophecy about it. Days of calamity and darkness will be on the globe. Buildings that are now standing won't be there. Some places will vanish entirely. The time is limited. Then he said what God told him. My people, I want you to know, me alone, I will take you into the desert. I will take you away from everything you now rely on, leaving you with just me. When I am your only possession, you'll possess everything, and more plentiful than ever. Dr. Martin continued, what you now will see is the outcome of man spitting in God's face. Many of you are to blame for the terrible events that will be happening, because they sold themselves to the devil in their quest for power, which is motivated by avarice and conceit. This was prophesied 60 years after Johanna spoke to the messenger. She was fearful, but the messenger calmed her down. Do not fear. You saw that the outburst will be of short duration. You have been called to warn your people by seeing a live example of the scene. Prepare the home to unite in justice in an effort to break the might of the storm. The judgment that cannot be avoided can be softened. The terror can be shortened. The disasters cannot be avoided, but they can be reduced. It depends on the power of your call and whether the nation will be prepared to listen. Then he showed her how it will start. He said, "Look." She looked and saw a miniature native Asahai lying on the ground before her, which means the leader will be a youngish black person. The Asahai is the weapon of choice among certain black tribes. Then she saw the start of a strike that quickly spread across the country, and the letters XL hung high in the sky. Everything had grounded to a standstill. Even the big business houses were locked and deserted, and nothing was functioning any longer. Seer van Rensburg said that the trouble will start at the time when the yellow peaches in the Transvaal will be ripening. Therefore, it will be in the second half of February. He also said that the Third World War will already be well underway when these strikes will begin, and it will still be cold or still be winter. The strikes will be so intense that the whole of South Africa will be paralyzed. The seer said that during this country-wide strike, a black leader will die, and according to Johanna, it will be a youngish black person. While this is going on, the blacks organize in secret, and one night they assemble in Johannesburg.
The ANC may eventually lose the ability to grow and to renew itself. So therefore, I call upon you to return to the militancy of the ANC Youth League of the 1944 era, to go back to the militancy of the ANC Youth League of the 80s and the 90s. This is your heritage. That is where you belong. That is where we want to see the ANC Youth League returning to. We don't want to see an ANC Youth League that is docile. We don't want to see an ANC Youth League that is asleep during a revolution. You are the revolution.
Shoot to kill, Hamaza, kill the poor, the farmer, kill the poor, the farmer, brr, pa, pa, brr, pa, pa.
And while the coffin descends into the grave, the seer saw fires, which means revolution, erupting around it and quickly spread across the country. Then everything happens quickly and unexpectedly. The power is cut in and around the city. After that, Johana saw them spread through the white residential areas and murdering the white people far and wide. Thousands upon thousands of whites will die during the Egyptian night that will descend over Johannesburg. She wrote, "When I saw in the vision all the mutilated bodies lying around me, I called out in shock, 'This cannot be, because there are not so many people in Johannesburg.' That was in 1916. The enormous task of warning the black people was laid on her shoulders. Little did she know that no warning then would have made any difference. The black people didn't heed the warning, but her visions are extremely important now. Johana wrote, "The way in which they murdered the whites is too terrible for words. Like 165 years before at Blaukrans, the savage blacks grabbed the whites' babies by their feet and dashed their soft little heads against the nearest hard objects. The screams were terrible. Women and children, old and young, were mown down by the guns, assegais, knopkieries, bush knives, or any other weapon the blacks could lay their hands on. Any sort of weapon was used in these attacks, leaving the dead lying in their own blood. People tried to flee, but they were caught and mercilessly cut down and left to die. There was blood everywhere, on the pavements, in the houses, apartment buildings and shops. At daybreak I saw how the black hordes moved towards Pretoria. That was the signal for the other blacks in the country to join in the murdering spree and systematically kill the whites in their own towns. She also heard them refer to this as our great day." Johana relates that the messenger told her, he warned that because the judgment will be severe on any blacks who ignore this command of the Almighty, the blacks and coloureds, Muslims, and people from other nationalities must know that when the first shockwaves hit the country, it won't be a normal storm. the initial attack from the blacks will be before the storm of which the messenger spoke first. It will be the storm that will kill the many millions of black people who attacked the whites, and it will be the storm that will rid the Boer Volk of all its enemies, everyone who plans its demise. It will be a storm in which miracles will take place. It will be short-lived, but tens of millions will die. She continued, "He told me it will be the great preparation for the day of the Lord. Woe unto him who even think of benefiting from the general chaos, confusion, and despair that will rule, or him that will exploit the helpless of the white people. And woe unto any black who contemplates murder and plunder, rape and destruction. These will have no chance at all to survive." The messenger further warned the black people of South Africa. They may have no hand in the shattering and suffering of the white people. Another person said he saw in a vision how the white people tried to flee. They were in their cars on the highway, but there was an obstruction to the front. The blacks descended upon the helpless whites, dragged them out of their vehicles, and stabbed and hewed them down with machetes. Men, women, children, and babies were all slaughtered. The messenger explained, "Small strikes will go over into bigger strikes, which will lead to revolution, and it will end in civil war, followed by famine and pestilence. All these will accumulate in a catastrophe that can't be described in words. When all this is happening, then the time of the end will be at the door, and you must be ready. Blow upon blow, destruction upon destruction, death, sorrow, and violence. There will not be a pause. And then the storm will come." Johanna wrote, "The strongest heart will shudder when the explosion comes, when nature's elements unleashes their fury on us, and the slumbering wrath bursts into rage and all-devouring fire. Woe, woe, South Africa! I saw everything in the spirit, and I nearly died from terror, and my hair turned white in one night. How will we be saved in this reality?" This will be the forerunner for what is to happen shortly after in Europe, where a war will be raging as well. This devastating scene will shift quickly over to Africa to the north, and will bring immense damage and destruction to that region. But Johanna saw hope for South Africa. There was one beam of light over the scene. It was the outstretched hand of God's mercy. Will we not grab it? I saw the power of the fast oncoming hurricane be broken by our own resistance. The direction of the hurricane was turned away from the places where it would have done the most damage, and there were thousands of us who completely forgot ourselves in an effort to save others. A column of beseeching prayers went up to heaven day and night, and it dispersed the dark clouds where they were gathering at their thickest. Deliverance came when we least expected it. It will end as quickly as it began. Then she quoted from Daniel 12. "And there shall be a time of trouble, such as there never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book." Psalm 91 verse 2, "I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in Him I will trust." And God answers in verse 15, "He shall call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him." At the end she pleads with her people, "Let us as a folk be united in justice for the great things that is near at hand." The fact that South Africa would not be as hard hit as the rest of the world was some consolation. The messenger told her that God had chosen South Africa as a special instrument through which the whole world would be blessed. He also issued a special warning with a specific purpose to the people of that country. But know this message of prophetic warning would be more readily believed by the simple and unspoiled people in the world. And when the time comes for the prophetic disasters for this country to be fulfilled, the world will see how well prepared you are and how capable you are to meet these problems head on. They will see that you are brave and fully trustworthy in the face of the worst perils, that you can remain calm in the raging anger of the storm, that you do your duty despite the dangers, and they will accept the evidence of your example and be compelled to follow it, in order for them to be saved on the big day, the second coming of Christ that will come. God will show mercy to South Africa, Johanna realized, but there were also conditions and responsibilities that rest on the shoulders of the Boer Volk. They have to be ready and well prepared for what is coming, because they had ample warning. There will not be any room for division. And then she said, "A beautiful light not of this world washed over the dismal scene, and I stared at it in wonder and reverence. I saw the glory and exalted presence of our beloved Master in our midst, here in South Africa. And that was the whole meaning of the visions that I had, that Jesus Christ, our God, will come to us when the purifying storms and preparation has passed, and the hearts of the people had been made ready through suffering to meet him. The second coming of Christ after the night of the storm will be accompanied by big surprises, because the humble will be elevated and the arrogant and the proud will be humiliated. In this struggle between light and darkness, human tools will be used on both sides, and they will be willing tools. There is no such thing as compulsion. Each one will willingly choose a side. For that reason, God has created a conscience in each of us. We know therefore that in the last struggle between good and evil, we will have to decide where we want to stand." After the night of the terror, she saw the day break, and it was as if heaven descended on South Africa. This vision about the bloodshed in South Africa upset her more than the others because of what she saw. It wasn't confined to her country, but would soon spread across the world. The storms that preceded the coming of our Lord and the glory and splendor it brought to the country was different from all the other afflictions that South Africa had gone through in the past. It was different from any kind of peace and prosperity that we have enjoyed in the past, because it was a heavenly radiation that overshadowed us and can't be compared to anything else. The messenger quoted from scripture, "Thus speaks the Lord to the folk of South Africa," 1 Peter 2 verses 9 to 10. "But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should shew forth the praises of him who hath called you out of the darkness into this marvelous light, which in time past were not a people, but are now the people of God, which had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy." The glory of Europe belongs to the past. The fall of the British kingdom is at hand. The worldly riches and power of America has reached its top, and in the future it will slowly be taken away from him. What is left then? South Africa will be the hope of the world, the land of promise, of freedom, and of liberation. Your people have been chosen out of all the peoples of the world, and God will have mercy on you now. He saw your oppression, his heart goes out to you. He heard the sighing of your dispersed, impoverished, and divided people, and his holy wrath is ignited against your enemies.
This camp used to be the old Coronation Park camp. The government decided to put the people off the property, and they moved them to this property, which is actually an old landfill.
South Africa will be the land of the future. There are precious minerals in the soil that haven't yet been discovered, and which will place South Africa on the forefront of the world. There are still other untold riches in the earth that will be brought out by the Boer nation. God will bless you again, because you are the chosen people of God. Then Johanna described the end. Then came the light, the blinding light and glory. The mere handful of people who remain will be purified, so much purified that it will be possible for the Son of Righteousness to live among them and reign over them for 1,000 years as a priest-king. And she said further, "I also see an unbelievable miracle that will take place, and when I saw it I knew, only then will that which my people so yearn for, our own republic, be fulfilled, and then the time of my vision will also have passed." Even though no one realized it, division and betrayal among the Boers and Afrikaners were mostly the cause of our downfall. A divide that was incited in an unscrupulous and detestable manner by a cunning enemy. The avarice of the British was at last satisfied after the fall of the two Boer republics and the signing of the Peace of Vereniging. The British attacked two peaceful republics because they wanted to lay their hands on the riches of those two small pieces of land. People who fought hard and brought blood offers for their land were murdered by the British. White women and children cruelly butchered, being hated for no reason, homes and farms burned to the ground. According to Johanna, England's punishment for what that country did will start after the end of the First World War. The people who will survive in South Africa will be servants of Christ and God, those who do right according to God's laws and the Bible. King David said, "When you walk the right path, you will have no reason to fear." Psalms 23 verse 4, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." But still, we will all be tested, weighed, and sealed.